Have you ever experienced this moment? The phone rings, the screen lights up, and for a brief second, your heart feels heavy. For many people, answering a call is nothing more than a simple reflex. They pick up without hesitation, ready to engage, ready to talk. But for you, it's different. You pause. You hesitate. And in that pause, a strange weight settles on your chest. It's not that you dislike people. It's not that you hold resentment toward the caller on the other end. In fact, you may even care deeply about them. Yet the thought of pressing that green button, of stepping into a conversation you did not choose, makes you recoil. Why does something so small feel so overwhelming? Why does the sound of a ringing phone, just a few notes of a familiar tone, feel like an intrusion into your peace? To answer these questions, we have to look beneath the surface. We live in a society that expects instant responses. A call unanswered is often labeled rude, distant, or antisocial. But psychology teaches us that our instincts are rarely without meaning. That hesitation, that reluctance to pick up, is not laziness. It is not arrogance. It is, in many cases, a signal from the deeper layers of the psyche. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, would remind us that the mind does not act at random. He believed that even the smallest reaction points toward the hidden structure of our inner life. So, what does it mean when a phone call feels like a burden? Why does your body tense at the thought of answering? Think for a moment about what a ringing phone represents. It is more than sound. It is more than a request to talk. It is a sudden demand for your presence, a disruption of your solitude, an invitation that you did not extend. And within seconds, you are expected to shift from whatever state you were in reading, resting, reflecting, into the performance of conversation. This shift requires energy. It requires you to put on what Jung called the persona, the social mask that allows us to interact smoothly with others. The persona is useful. It helps you navigate work, friendships, and family. But it is also exhausting, because it is not the whole truth of who you are. And when the phone rings, especially when you are unprepared, you feel the weight of slipping into that mask once again. It is not about rejecting people. It is about protecting the fragile space where you feel most yourself. Notice what happens in that brief pause before you decide. A storm of questions rises inside you. What does this person want? Am I ready to talk? Do I have the energy to be polite, to listen, to respond? All of these questions flash by in an instant. And if your answer is no, your body signals it clearly. You feel heavy. You hesitate. You may even let the phone ring out, relieved when the sound finally stops. Far from being a flaw, this reaction can be understood as a boundary. It is your psyche's way of saying, "This is not the right moment." And respecting that message is not weakness. It is a form of self-care, a recognition that constant availability is not the same as true connection. When Jung spoke of introversion and the movement of psychic energy, he was not describing shyness. He was describing a pattern of life. Some people are recharged by outward contact, while others are drained by it. If you are among the latter, then a phone call can feel less like an opportunity and more like an invasion. It interrupts the silent order of your inner world. So the next time your phone rings and you hesitate, remember this: you are not broken. You are not strange. You are listening, perhaps without even knowing it, to the quiet voice of your soul. And in a culture that glorifies constant interaction, the courage to listen to that voice is more valuable than you might think. When we begin to ask why a simple act like answering the phone feels so heavy, it is important to remember that psychology has already explored this terrain. Carl Jung, one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, would tell us very clearly, this experience is not unusual. In fact, it is part of the natural structure of human energy. Jung proposed that people differ not just in personality traits, but in the very direction of their psychic energy. He called these directions introversion and extroversion. You have probably heard those terms before, often reduced to stereotypes: the introvert as the shy recluse, the extrovert as the outgoing life of the party. But Jung's insight went far deeper. For him, introversion and extroversion were not about social skill or confidence. They were about how the psyche sustains itself, how it recharges, how it keeps balance. Think of psychic energy the way you think of a battery. Some batteries charge when they are plugged into an external source. Others hold their strength by remaining in a stable, enclosed circuit. People are no different. The extroverted type is like a solar panel, drawing vitality from light, contact, and stimulation. Their energy rises when they talk, when they meet, when they are surrounded by others. The introverted type, on the other hand, is like a deep well. Their energy is restored in silence, in reflection, in solitude. They must draw inward, not outward, to feel alive again. Now imagine what happens when these two patterns are disrupted. For an extrovert, too much silence can feel suffocating. They long for contact because it feeds them. For an introvert, however, unexpected interruption, like the sudden shrill of a phone, feels draining. It pulls them out of their natural rhythm, forcing them to invest energy they may not have prepared to spend. This is why you may feel exhausted at the sound of that ringtone. It is not about dislike. It is not about avoidance. It is simply the way your system is wired. Jung insisted that these orientations are not choices we make each morning. They are dispositions of the soul, baked into the architecture of who we are. To go against them is to fight yourself, and the result is always inner conflict. Pause for a moment and reflect on your own life. Do you feel lighter after a long evening of conversation, or do you feel depleted? Do you seek out people to recover from stress, or do you retreat into quiet to heal? These are not small preferences. They reveal the entire map of your psychic economy. Understanding them is the first step toward respecting your natural boundaries. It is easy to see how society, with its constant demand for availability, tends to reward the extroverted orientation. Quick replies, instant engagement, constant presence, these are celebrated as virtues. But for the introverted soul, these demands can become unbearable. The phone call is not just a call. It is a sudden leak in the battery, a flow of energy outwards when what you truly need is to turn inward. Jung's brilliance was to show us that neither orientation is superior. Both are necessary. Extroverts bring life, contact, and connection to the world. Introverts bring depth, reflection, and meaning. The problem arises only when we force one orientation to live like the other. When an introverted person feels guilty for not wanting to pick up the phone, they are in fact betraying their own inner design. And when they push too hard against that design, what follows is fatigue, irritability, even resentment. So the next time you hesitate, the next time you let the call ring out while you sit in silence, know this: you are not failing at social life. You are simply honoring the way your energy moves. You are recognizing, perhaps without words, that true connection can only happen when you have the strength to be present. And sometimes, the greatest act of respect for yourself and for others is to wait until that strength has returned. Carl Jung often reminded us that the objects around us are never just objects. They are symbols, living carriers of meaning, reflections of the psyche itself. What we touch, what we hear, what surrounds us each day can reveal the inner architecture of our soul. And in this light, something as ordinary as a telephone is far from ordinary. It becomes a symbol boundary line drawn between the outside world and the intimate inner space you call your own. Think about it. The phone rests quietly on your desk, a small rectangle of plastic and glass, lifeless until it rings. And then, with a sudden burst of sound, it comes alive. That ring is not neutral. It is not simply a request to speak. It is a force that crosses a threshold. At one moment, you are in your private world thinking, resting, perhaps immersed in silence. In the next, an external demand pierces that world, reaching across the invisible line between out there and in here. For Jung, such thresholds are sacred. They are the doors of the psyche, the places where the self meets the other, where the conscious world meets the unconscious. And every time the phone rings, it is as if someone has knocked on that inner door without warning. You feel the jolt not because you dislike people, but because your boundary has been breached. Boundaries are essential to psychological health. They are not barriers that shut life out, but membranes that regulate what comes in and what goes out. Without them, the self is overwhelmed, flooded by demands it cannot meet. With them, the self maintains balance, choosing when and how to engage. And the telephone, in this symbolic sense, represents one of the most fragile of those boundaries. Its call demands an instant response, an immediate crossing of the threshold, regardless of whether you are prepared. Consider the difference between opening your door to a guest you invited and having a stranger barge in unannounced. The first feels natural, expected. The second feels intrusive, even if the stranger means no harm. The phone, when it rings without warning, produces something of that same effect. It is the world entering before you are ready to receive it. This explains the unease that so many people feel but rarely admit. They are not afraid of conversation. They are not inherently unsociable. What they resist is the sudden collapse of the border between their inner sanctuary and the outer demands of life. And this resistance is not a flaw, it is a natural defense, an instinctive protection of the soul's territory. Jung believed that every symbol carries both danger and possibility. The phone is no exception. On one hand, it connects us, bridges distance, carries voices across space. On the other hand, it threatens to erode the very solitude that makes connection meaningful. When the call comes, you are faced with a choice: to let the outer world in or to preserve the stillness within. Both choices matter. Both choices shape the story of your psychological life. What is most important is awareness. If you answer unconsciously, out of habit or guilt, you may feel drained, resentful, even invaded. But if you recognize the phone for what it symbolizes, a threshold, you gain the power to decide. You learn that you can protect your boundaries without shame. You can honor the silence of your own space without apology. And when you do choose to answer, it will not be from compulsion, but from freedom, a conscious act of opening your door to the other. So the next time your phone rings, listen closely, not only to the sound of the caller's tone, but to the echo it stirs inside you. Ask yourself, am I ready to cross this threshold? Do I want to invite this presence into my inner space right now? In those few seconds lies the truth Jung was pointing to. The phone is not just a device. It is a symbol, and each ring is a reminder that your inner world is precious, worth guarding, and worthy of respect. Jung taught us that within every person lies what he called the shadow, the hidden side of the psyche, the place where suppressed emotions, unprocessed memories, and unacknowledged fears are stored. Most of the time, this shadow remains invisible, quietly shaping our reactions without our awareness. But then, an unexpected sound, like the sudden ring of a phone, can act as a trigger, pulling the shadow into the light. Think of how it feels when the ringtone breaks the silence. Your body reacts before your mind even has time to reason. A quick tightening of the chest, a rush of tension in the stomach, perhaps even an odd feeling of dread that seems out of proportion to the situation. This is the shadow stirring. The sound has touched something inside you, a place where unhealed experiences still live. Why does this happen? Because the psyche is layered. On the surface, you may think, it's just a phone call, nothing more. But beneath that surface lies material that was never fully integrated, moments of anxiety, traces of past conflict, even old fears you tried to ignore. Jung described the shadow as the sum of everything we push away, everything we do not want to admit belongs to us. And because it remains hidden, it waits for the right stimulus to emerge. A phone call, as simple as it seems, can be that stimulus. The voice on the other end, the unexpected demand for attention, even the association with past stressful calls can awaken old wounds. You may not consciously remember the argument, the bad news, the difficult conversation, but your body remembers. The shadow remembers. And so the discomfort rises, leaving you restless, uneasy, even irritated without knowing why. It is tempting to dismiss this reaction as oversensitivity. Yet in depth psychology, such moments are seen as important messages. The shadow is not your enemy. It is a teacher. It holds not only pain, but also potential, the parts of you that long to be acknowledged, healed, and integrated. When you feel that surge of discomfort at the sound of the phone, it may be the psyche's way of pointing to unfinished business. Something inside you is asking to be seen. Notice how this changes the way we understand hesitation. Instead of labeling yourself rude or antisocial, you begin to see that what rises in you is a signal. The call is not just from another person. It is also a call from within, a reminder that your inner life contains corners still waiting for light. Jung once said, "What you do not bring into consciousness will appear in your life as fate. A simple call can carry that fate, revealing what you have yet to face." Of course, not every ring awakens trauma. Sometimes it is subtle, just a faint unease, an almost physical urge to delay. But even that points to the shadow's presence. The boundary between your private self and the outside world is fragile, and when it is crossed, the shadow reacts to protect you. That protection may look like avoidance, but in reality, it is the psyche's defense, trying to shield what is vulnerable until you are ready. The key is awareness. If you know the shadow is being activated, you can pause and reflect instead of judging yourself. Ask, what exactly am I feeling right now? Where does this sensation come from? What might this call be touching in me that I haven't addressed? These questions open the door to self-understanding. The discomfort becomes less of a curse and more of a guide. So the next time a phone call unsettles you, remember this. It is not simply about the caller, nor about your dislike for conversation. It is about the shadow, your hidden self, being stirred awake. And though it feels uncomfortable, that awakening is also an opportunity. Each ring, each uneasy breath, is an invitation to bring what is hidden into awareness, to meet the parts of yourself that have been waiting in silence. Each time you answer the phone, notice what happens. Almost instantly, you slip into a role. Your voice changes, your words are chosen with care, and your emotions are carefully managed. This is not accidental. This is the persona at work, the social mask described by Carl Jung. The persona is one of Jung's most important concepts. He explained that in order to live within society, every human being develops a kind of mask, a way of presenting themselves that is acceptable to others. It is not false, but it is not the full truth either. It is a compromise, a polished version of the self designed to meet the expectations of family, colleagues, and friends. When you greet someone politely, when you adjust your tone to fit the situation, when you hide your irritation to appear calm, this is the persona in action. Now think of how this plays out in the moment of a phone call. Before you pick up, you are simply yourself, relaxed, unguarded, immersed in your own rhythm. But the moment you hear the other person's voice, you adjust. You shift into the role of the polite conversationalist, the attentive listener, the composed speaker. Without realizing it, you are performing. And performance always requires energy. This is why answering the phone can feel draining, especially when you are unprepared. To step into the persona is to step away, however briefly, from your authentic state. It is like putting on a uniform, useful, necessary, but heavy if worn for too long. When the call catches you in a moment of rest, the demand to wear that mask feels even heavier. You are forced to summon a version of yourself that is ready for social exchange, even when your inner world longs for quiet. Jung warned of the dangers of confusing the persona with the true self. The persona is a tool, not an identity. It allows you to function, but it cannot sustain your soul. If you spend too much time in the mask always polite, always controlled, you begin to feel hollow, disconnected, almost like an actor who has forgotten where the stage ends and where life begins. The phone, with its sudden insistence, accelerates this process. In an instant, you are thrust into the role, whether or not you are ready to play it. Consider the details of this shift. You lower or raise your tone depending on who is calling. You monitor your words to avoid offense. You suppress your sigh, your fatigue, your irritation. You even become aware of your surroundings, the background noise, the echo of your voice. All of this vigilance consumes psychic energy, and the longer the call continues, the more that energy drains away. For extroverted personalities, this process may feel natural, even energizing. But for those with an introverted orientation, the demand of the persona in such moments is immense. It is not that you dislike the person speaking to you. It is that maintaining the mask comes at a cost. Every smile in your tone, every carefully chosen word, requires effort that leaves you emptier when the call ends. This is why the persona must be understood, not condemned. Jung never suggested that we should throw away the mask entirely. Society requires it. Without some form of persona, relationships would falter, communication would break down. But he urged us to recognize its limits. The mask is not your essence. It is not the center of who you are. It is a layer useful but temporary. So when you feel that wave of exhaustion after a simple phone call, it is not weakness. It is the natural toll of the persona. You are reminded that pretending, adjusting, and performing, even for the sake of harmony, cannot be your permanent state. The psyche demands moments of authenticity, times when the mask can be set aside and the self can breathe. The truth, then, is simple. Each ring of the phone forces you to make a choice. Will you wear the mask once more, or will you honor the need to remain yourself? There is no wrong answer, only awareness. But the more conscious you are of this choice, the less guilty you will feel when you decline, and the more present you will be when you accept. That is the wisdom Jung offered. Use the persona when necessary, but never mistake it for your soul. In a world that praises constant activity, silence is often misunderstood. When someone chooses not to answer the phone, when they prefer to sit quietly rather than engage, society is quick to label them as lazy, distant, or even antisocial. But in the language of psychology, these judgments miss the truth. What appears as withdrawal is often a form of protection and natural mechanism by which the psyche guards its own vitality. Carl Jung emphasized that the human soul is not a machine designed to run endlessly on external demands. It is an ecosystem, delicate and complex, sustained by rhythms of expansion and retreat. Just as the body requires rest between periods of exertion, the psyche requires stillness between moments of social exchange. Without those intervals of quiet, the inner world becomes depleted, leaving you anxious, irritable, or numb. This is why the pause, the gap of silence that follows the decision not to pick up, so essential. It is not an act of defiance. It is a way of restoring equilibrium. In that pause, you are no longer forced to respond to someone else's timeline. You return, however briefly, to your own. And in that space, you can hear again the subtle signals of your inner life. Your thoughts, your needs, your emotions, often drowned out by the noise of constant interaction. Think of it this way. Every conversation, every demand for attention is like a wave breaking upon the shore. One wave is manageable, even refreshing. But if the waves never stop, the shoreline erodes. Your energy, your clarity, your sense of self begins to wear away. Silence is the moment the tide recedes, giving the shore time to rebuild. Without it, you are swept away, piece by piece, until nothing solid remains. Jung believed that introverted individuals feel this truth most acutely. Their source of energy lies within, and so each interruption pulls at that inner reservoir. But the principle applies to everyone. Even the most extroverted soul cannot live in perpetual conversation. Without silence, their words lose depth. Their presence loses authenticity. The psyche, regardless of type, demands moments of retreat. This is why it is dangerous to confuse silence with weakness. To decline a call, to close the door, to sit in stillness is not laziness, it is discipline. It takes courage to resist the pressure of constant availability. It takes wisdom to know that true responsiveness requires renewal. Only when the inner well is full can you pour out again without resentment. Consider the difference between answering a call when you are exhausted and answering when you are rested. In the first case, you may sound polite, but beneath the surface you feel drained, even resentful. In the second, you offer not only your words, but your presence, your sincerity, your energy. The difference is profound, and it all depends on whether you honored the pause, the sacred silence, beforehand. Psychological research supports this as well. Studies on overstimulation show that constant interruption diminishes attention, memory, and emotional stability. The nervous system itself requires downtime to process and integrate experience. Without it, stress hormones remain elevated, leaving the body tense and the mind unsettled. What Jung intuited nearly a century ago, neuroscience now confirms: silence is not optional, it is essential. So, the next time you feel the urge to let the phone ring out, do not shame yourself. Recognize instead that you are practicing care for the most important boundary of all, the boundary between your inner world and the outer demands that seek to cross it. By preserving silence, you are not avoiding life. You are preparing for it. You are giving yourself the chance to return with clarity, strength, and authenticity. In truth, the pause is not empty. It is full of meaning. It is the moment when the soul gathers itself, when the psyche breathes. And only by honoring that silence can you hope to engage with the world in a way that is not rushed, not forced, but deeply human. Carl Jung often spoke of one of the most important journeys any human being can undertake, the process of individuation. By this he meant the lifelong path of becoming who you truly are, beyond the expectations of society, beyond the masks you wear, beyond the roles you were taught to perform. Individuation is not about perfection, nor is it about pleasing others. It is about wholeness. It is about aligning your outer life with your inner truth. Now, what does this have to do with something as ordinary as refusing to answer a phone call? At first glance, very little. But Jung would argue otherwise. He believed that individuation begins in the smallest choices, the quiet moments where you decide whether to betray yourself for the sake of social duty or to honor the voice that rises within you. When you let the call go unanswered, not from neglect, but from awareness, you are saying, I choose to remain whole. I choose not to fracture myself in order to perform for others. This act is not about running away. Withdrawal, in this sense, is not escape. It is preservation. By holding back, by maintaining silence when you are not ready to speak, you protect the fragile unity of your inner world. And this unity is essential. Because without it, the process of individuation cannot unfold. To become yourself, you must first remain intact. Think of it as a garden. Growth does not happen when the soil is constantly disturbed. Seeds require stillness to take root. In the same way, your psyche needs moments of pause to integrate, to gather strength, to weave together the conscious and the unconscious. If you answer every demand, if you scatter your energy into endless conversations, you disrupt that process. Individuation requires patience, and patience requires silence. Of course, the world rarely understands this. To decline an invitation, to refuse a call, to step back from the noise, is often misinterpreted as coldness or avoidance. But Jung insisted that individuation is not lived for the crowd. It is a solitary path, walked not in the spotlight, but in the shadows of the self. Each time you listen to your own need for space, you take a step further down that path. This is why the small act of saying no can feel so powerful. In that moment, you affirm that your worth is not tied to constant availability. You affirm that you are not simply a role to be played, but a person with depth, complexity, and limits. And limits are not signs of weakness. They are signs of identity. They tell you where you end and the outside world begins. Respecting them is the foundation of becoming whole. Individuation is not dramatic. It does not always arrive with visions or revelations. More often, it takes shape in these subtle decisions, the choice to protect your morning silence, the decision to let the phone rest on the table while you breathe, the willingness to endure someone else's disappointment in order to remain honest with yourself. Each decision is like a stone laid on the path, marking the way toward your true self. So the next time you feel guilty for not picking up, remind yourself, you are not rejecting life. You are preparing for it. You are choosing not to fragment yourself, not to wear the mask when your soul is unready. In doing so, you honor the delicate process of individuation. You honor the journey of becoming whole. And in a world that demands constant performance, there may be no act more radical than that. In Jungian psychology, one of the most powerful archetypes is the hermit. You may know this figure from ancient stories or from tarot imagery, the old man with a lantern, walking alone through the darkness, searching not for company, but for truth. Jung saw the hermit not as a symbol of loneliness or social failure, but as an inner guide, a voice that urges you to retreat from noise so that you can encounter yourself more honestly. When you decline a phone call, it may feel trivial, even awkward. But seen through Jung's lens, it can also be understood as a way of nourishing your inner hermit. You are saying no not just to a conversation, but to the distraction that conversation might bring. You are choosing to protect a space where silence reigns, where your thoughts can unfold without interruption, where the faint whispers of the unconscious can be heard. The hermit archetype is not about rejecting the world. It is about balancing it. In the midst of constant motion mails, calls, conversations, demands, the hermit appears to remind you that truth is often found in stillness. Without withdrawal, you cannot reflect. Without reflection, you cannot integrate. And without integration, you cannot grow. To refuse the call, then, is not an escape. It is a return to the center, to the quiet lamp within you that illuminates the path forward. Think about how this plays out in your daily life. The phone rings. You feel the urge to answer, to comply, to perform. Yet at the same time, another voice arises, subtle but firm. Not now. That voice is the hermit. It is the part of you that recognizes the danger of scattering your energy before you have gathered it. It is the guardian of your inner sanctuary, reminding you that wisdom does not come from constant reaction, but from deliberate attention. Many people fear this archetype because they confuse solitude with isolation. But Jung was clear: solitude is not the same as abandonment. The hermit does not withdraw because he despises others. He withdraws because he knows that to meet others authentically, he must first meet himself. His light, the lantern he carries, is the light of awareness. And such light can only be kindled in darkness, in silence, in moments when the external world is kept at bay. In modern life, the phone has become one of the loudest symbols of intrusion. Every ring demands immediate presence. Every notification pulls you outward. To resist that pull is to practice the hermit's wisdom. It is to affirm that your time, your focus, your soul are not endlessly available for consumption. And in that resistance, you preserve the conditions for clarity, depth, and truth. Consider what happens when you embrace this inner hermit. Instead of feeling guilty for silence, you begin to see it as sacred. Instead of judging your reluctance, you honor it as guidance. Over time, this shift changes your relationship with yourself. You no longer measure your worth by constant accessibility. You measure it by authenticity, by whether your actions align with the deeper rhythm of your being. Jung believed that each archetype offers a doorway to self-knowledge. The hermit's doorway is silence. By walking through it, you begin to discover the truths that cannot be spoken in the noise of everyday life. And though the path may seem lonely, it is in fact the path that reconnects you most deeply with your essence, with your values, with the parts of yourself you had long forgotten. So, when you let the phone ring and choose not to answer, remember this: you are not turning away from life. You are walking alongside the hermit within you, carrying the lantern of awareness, seeking the light that only silence can reveal. And in doing so, you take one more step toward the wisdom that Jung believed lives in every human soul. It is one thing to understand why a phone call can feel intrusive, and another to know what to do about it. Awareness is the first step, but practice is the next. Jung reminded us that insight without action quickly fades. If you want to protect your energy and honor your inner boundaries, you must translate that awareness into simple, intentional habits. The first habit is to set personal rules for yourself. This does not mean rigid discipline or cold avoidance. It means giving yourself permission to answer only when you are truly ready. Too often, we treat the phone as a master, responding immediately as though every ring were an emergency. But most calls are not urgent. They can wait until your state of mind is calm, until you feel steady enough to engage. By establishing the rule that you do not answer under pressure, you reclaim authority over your time. The phone no longer dictates the rhythm of your life, you do. A second practical step is to use messages or scheduling as buffers. Instead of defaulting to the immediate conversation, allow yourself the option of delay. A short message, "Can we talk later?" or a habit of arranging calls in advance creates a boundary that is both polite and protective. It communicates respect for the other person while maintaining respect for yourself. Boundaries, after all, are not about shutting people out. They are about creating conditions in which genuine connection can occur. When both parties are prepared, the conversation is more meaningful, more focused, and less draining. The third principle is to choose connections that nourish you rather than responding out of pressure. Not every interaction is equally valuable. Some conversations inspire, support, and renew your spirit. Others leave you depleted, distracted, or even resentful. Learning to distinguish between the two is an act of maturity. It requires you to ask, does this exchange add to my life, or does it merely consume my energy? By prioritizing relationships that bring depth and authenticity, you free yourself from the endless cycle of shallow contact. You are no longer reacting to obligation. You are engaging with intention. These steps may sound simple, but they are radical in a culture that glorifies constant accessibility. To pause before answering, to ask for time, to decline calls that do not serve your well-being. These are small acts of resistance against a world that equates availability with value. Jung would call them steps on the path to individuation, because each decision is a moment of alignment between your outer action and your inner truth. There is also a psychological shift that comes with practicing these habits. You begin to feel less guilty for silence. You stop apologizing for protecting your energy. Instead, you discover a quiet confidence, the knowledge that by honoring your limits, you are becoming more present, more authentic, and more capable of offering your best when it truly matters. Imagine the difference. In one version of your life, you answer every call, scatter your attention, and slowly burn out. In the other, you pause, you choose, you guard your silence, and as a result, when you do speak, your words carry weight. This is not selfishness. This is self-respect. It is the recognition that relationships are strongest when they are chosen, not when they are forced. So begin with small steps. The next time your phone rings, check in with yourself before answering. If your body feels tense, if your mind is scattered, give yourself permission to wait. If the conversation is important, arrange it for a moment when you can be fully present. And if it is not important, let it pass. In doing so, you honor not just your boundaries, but your soul. And that, ultimately, is the deepest action Jung would encourage, to live in a way that reflects who you truly are, even in something as ordinary as the way you answer or do not answer the phone. As we come to the end of this reflection, it is important to return to the simplest truth of all. Not liking to answer the phone is not a defect. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is not evidence that you are antisocial, cold, or ungrateful. Instead, it is a signal from your own soul, a gentle reminder that silence has value, that your inner space is sacred, and that you have the right to protect it. Too often, we measure ourselves by external standards. We ask, am I responsive enough? Am I available enough? Do I meet the expectations of others? And when we hesitate, when we decline, when we retreat into stillness, we interpret it as failure. But psychology offers us a different lens. Jung would say that your hesitation is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is your psyche's way of telling you that constant exposure is unsustainable, that the soul requires intervals of quiet if it is to remain whole. This changes everything. The refusal to pick up the phone is no longer an act of avoidance. It is an act of alignment. It means you are listening to your body, to your emotions, to the subtle signals of your inner world. It means you are choosing not to fracture yourself for the sake of appearances. And in that choice, you step closer to authenticity, closer to living in harmony with who you truly are. Think for a moment about the relief you feel when silence is restored. The call ends, the sound fades, and suddenly the atmosphere around you settles. That relief is not trivial. It is a form of restoration. It is the soul exhaling, reclaiming the ground it nearly lost. If you pay attention, you will notice that this restoration gives you back something essential: clarity, calm, and the ability to engage with the world on your own terms. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson here. To guard your silence is not to withdraw from life, but to prepare for it. Just as a musician needs pauses between notes for the melody to exist, the psyche needs moments of stillness for meaning to emerge. Without those pauses, everything becomes noise. By protecting your quiet, you give shape and depth to the music of your life. This is why the judgment of others, lazy, difficult, unsociable, is misplaced. What looks like distance from the outside is often devotion on the inside. Devotion to truth, to balance, to the fragile but vital process of self-integration. And far from diminishing your relationships, this devotion strengthens them. For only when you care for yourself can you meet others with sincerity, without resentment, without pretense. In the end, the phone is only a symbol. What matters is the principle it represents. Every ring asks you a question. Will you cross the boundary right now? Or will you remain within your sanctuary a little longer? Neither answer is wrong, but the key is that the choice belongs to you. It is your boundary, your space, your soul, and no one else can decide how you should guard it. So let this be your takeaway. The next time you hesitate, the next time you let the phone ring unanswered, do not condemn yourself. Recognize instead that you are honoring something deeper than convenience. You are honoring the temple of silence, the inner home where your psyche gathers strength. You are affirming that your way of being in the world is valid, that your love of stillness is not a flaw, but a form of wisdom. And in that wisdom lies freedom, the freedom to live not by the constant demands of the outer world, but by the quiet rhythm of your own soul.